In the heart of New York City, where dreams were woven as intricately as the finest fabrics, lived Sophia Martinez, a humble seamstress with fingers of gold and a heart of pure kindness. Her tiny apartment in Brooklyn was a testament to her modest means, but within those walls, magic happened. Night after night, Sophia would sit at her old sewing machine, creating gowns that seemed to capture the very essence of beauty itself. At 28, Sophia was a vision of grace, her long chestnut hair often tied back in a simple ponytail as she worked. Her deep brown eyes held a spark of creativity that never dimmed, even in the face of adversity. And adversity, it seemed, had become her constant companion. For 5 years, Sophia had worked tirelessly at Belmont and Finch, one of the most prestigious fashion houses in the city. Her talent was undeniable, her work ethic unmatched. Yet, for all her dedication, Sophia remained in the shadows, her brilliance overshadowed by those born into privilege and connections. As dawn broke over the city's skyline, Sophia hurried through the bustling streets, her arms laden with sketches for her latest designs. The spring air held a promise of new beginnings, and Sophia's heart fluttered with hope. Today was the day she would finally present her ideas to Victoria Belmont, the CEO of Belmont and Finch. The Belmont and Finch building loomed before her, a gleaming tower of glass and steel that seemed to touch the very heavens. Sophia took a deep breath, steeling herself for what lay ahead. As she stepped into the elevator, she caught sight of her reflection in the mirrored walls. "You can do this," she whispered to herself, clutching her portfolio tighter. The elevator doors opened to reveal the opulent top floor, a world away from Sophia's humble workroom in the basement. Crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead, and the plush carpet muffled her footsteps as she made her way to Victoria's office. "Ms. Belmont will see you now," the secretary announced, her voice as cold and impersonal as the decor. Sophia entered the office, her eyes widening at the panoramic view of the city spread out before her. Victoria Belmont sat behind an enormous desk, her platinum blonde hair pulled back in a severe bun, her ice blue eyes regarding Sophia with thinly veiled disdain. "Well, what is it?" Victoria snapped, not bothering to look up from her computer. Sophia swallowed hard, willing her voice not to tremble. "Ms. Belmont, I've prepared some designs for the upcoming spring collection. I believe they could really elevate our... Victoria interrupted, her eyebrow arching. "My dear, there is no "our" here. This is my company, and you are nothing but a seamstress." The words cut through Sophia like a knife, but she pressed on. "Please, if you'll just look at the sketches." With a dramatic sigh, Victoria held out her hand. Sophia quickly spread her designs across the desk, her heart pounding as she watched Victoria's face for any sign of approval. For a moment, something flickered in Victoria's eyes. Was it surprise? Admiration? But as quickly as it appeared, it vanished, replaced by a cruel smirk. "Did you really think these childish scribbles would impress me?" Victoria sneered, sweeping the sketches off her desk with a single motion. "You're delusional if you believe you have any place in the world of high fashion." Tears stung Sophia's eyes, but she refused to let them fall. "Ms. Belmont, I've worked here for 5 years. I've given everything to this company. Surely my dedication counts for something?" Victoria's laughter was like shards of ice. "Dedication? Please. You're nothing but a glorified maid with a needle. In fact..." Her eyes narrowed as a cruel idea formed. "Why don't we make that official?" Before Sophia could react, Victoria pressed a button on her intercom. "Security, please escort Ms. Martinez to her workroom. She'll be cleaning it out today." Sophia's world spun. "You're firing me? But why? What have I done wrong?" Victoria stood, towering over Sophia in her designer heels. "You've outlived your usefulness, my dear. And let's be honest, someone of your background was never going to truly fit in here. The words hung in the air, their implications clear. Sophia felt as though she'd been slapped. My background? You mean because Victoria cut her off sharply, that some people are born for greatness, and others are born to serve those who are great. It's time you learned your place. Security arrived, flanking Sophia on either side. As they let her out, Victoria called after her, "Oh, and Sophia? Don't bother trying to find work in this industry again. I'll make sure everyone knows what a disappointment you are." The journey to her workroom passed in a blur of tears and disbelief. How could this be happening? Sophia had poured her heart and soul into every stitch, every design. And now, in the blink of an eye, it was all over. As she packed up her meager belongings, Sophia's fingers brushed against a piece of shimmering fabric hidden beneath her work table. Her breath caught in her throat as she pulled it out. It was the start of a gown she'd been working on in secret, a design born from her deepest dreams and aspirations. For a moment, Sophia was tempted to leave it behind, to abandon the dream that had brought her nothing but pain. But something inside her refused to let go. With trembling hands, she carefully folded the fabric and tucked it into her bag. The rain was falling in sheets as Sophia stepped out onto the street, her few possessions clutched to her chest. She stood there, lost and alone, as the cruel world of high fashion turned its back on her. Little did Sophia know, her journey was far from over. For in the ashes of her shattered dreams, a phoenix was about to rise, one that would shake the very foundations of the fashion world and teach Victoria Belmont a lesson she would never forget. As Sophia made her way home through the rain-soaked streets of New York, her mind replayed the cruel words Victoria had spat at her. Each step felt heavier than the last, the weight of her broken dreams threatening to crush her spirit entirely. She barely noticed when she bumped into someone, mumbling an apology without looking up. "Sophia? Is that you?" A familiar voice cut through her misery. Blinking away tears, Sophia found herself face to face with Marco Rodriguez, her childhood friend from their small hometown in New Mexico. Marco's warm brown eyes widened with concern as he took in her disheveled appearance. "What happened? Are you okay?" he asked, gently guiding her under the awning of a nearby cafe. The kindness in his voice was her undoing. Sophia burst into tears, pouring out the whole miserable story between sobs. Marco listened intently, his face darkening with each cruel detail. "That's it," he declared when she finished. "You're coming home with me. I've got a spare room, and you shouldn't be alone right now." Sophia wanted to protest, but the fight had gone out of her. She nodded weakly, allowing Marco to hail a taxi and guide her inside. As they drove through the rain-slicked streets, Marco filled the silence with gentle chatter about his life since moving to the city. He was working as a junior partner at a law firm, he explained, specializing in employment law. "Maybe I can help you fight this," he mused. "What Belmont did sounds like wrongful termination to me." Sophia shook her head. "She'd crush me, Marco. You don't know how powerful she is in this industry." Marco's jaw set with determination. "We'll see about that." They arrived at a modest but well-kept brownstone in a quieter part of Brooklyn. As Marco showed her to the spare room, Sophia felt a wave of gratitude wash over her. At least she wasn't completely alone. That night, as rain lashed against the windows, Sophia tossed and turned, unable to escape the echoes of Victoria's cruel words. In her dreams, she saw herself drowning in a sea of fabric, reaching desperately for a lifeline that always remained just out of reach. She awoke with a start, her heart pounding. The room was bathed in the soft glow of early morning light. For a moment, Sophia allowed herself to believe it had all been a terrible nightmare. But the ache in her chest told her otherwise. As she made her way to the kitchen, the aroma of fresh coffee greeted her. Marco was already up, dressed for work in a sharp suit. "Good morning," he said softly, sliding a mug of coffee across the counter to her. "How are you feeling?" Sophia managed a weak smile. "Like I've been hit by a truck. But, thank you, Marco. For everything." He waved away her thanks. "That's what friends are for. Now, I've been thinking about your situation, and I have an idea." Sophia listened as Marco outlined his plan. He wanted to file a complaint against Belmont and Finch for discrimination and wrongful termination. "We might not win," he admitted, "but we can make enough noise to get their attention. Maybe even negotiate a settlement." The thought of facing Victoria again made Sophia's stomach churn. "I don't know, Marco. I just want to move on and forget this ever happened." Marco's eyes softened. "I understand. But Sophia, you can't let them get away with this. You have too much talent to just give up." His words stirred something in Sophia, a tiny spark of defiance that had been all but extinguished. She thought of the unfinished gown tucked away in her bag, of all the dreams she'd poured into every stitch. "Okay," she said finally. "Let's do it." Over the next few weeks, Sophia threw herself into building a case against Belmont and Finch. She and Marco pored over employment contracts, gathered testimonies from sympathetic coworkers, and documented every instance of discrimination she'd faced. But even as they worked, Sophia couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. Late at night, when the apartment was quiet, she would pull out her unfinished gown and work on it by lamplight. With each stitch, she felt a little piece of herself coming back to life. One evening, as she was adding delicate beadwork to the bodice, there was a knock at her door. It was Marco, looking troubled. "Sophia, we need to talk," he said, sitting on the edge of her bed. "I've been doing some digging, and, well, it's not good news." He explained that Victoria Belmont had powerful connections throughout the fashion industry. Several potential witnesses had suddenly become reluctant to testify, and there were whispers of a smear campaign being prepared against Sophia. "It's like fighting a hydra," Marco sighed. "Every time we make progress, 2 new obstacles pop up." Sophia felt the familiar weight of despair settling over her. "So that's it then? We just give up?" Marco shook his head firmly. "No way. We keep fighting. But we might need to change tactics." As they brainstormed new strategies, Sophia's eyes kept drifting to the gown draped over her sewing mannequin. An idea began to form, wild, risky, but potentially game-changing. "Marco," she said slowly, "what if we didn't just fight this in court? What if we took the battle to Victoria's own turf?" She outlined her plan, watching as Marco's eyes widened with a mixture of admiration and concern. "It's crazy," he said when she finished. "But it just might work." Over the next month, Sophia worked with a fervor she'd never known before. By day, she and Marco continued to build their legal case. But by night, she poured every ounce of her creativity and passion into her secret project. The gown began to take shape, a masterpiece of silk and lace, adorned with hand-sewn beadwork that caught the light like starlight on water. Into every stitch, Sophia wove her hopes, her fears, and her unwavering determination to prove Victoria wrong. As the day of the hearing approached, tension in the apartment reached a fever pitch. Marco was constantly on the phone, arguing with opposing counsel and trying to shore up their witnesses. Sophia, for her part, barely slept, determined to finish her creation in time. The night before the hearing, Sophia put the final touches on her gown. As she stepped back to admire her work, she felt a surge of pride unlike anything she'd ever experienced. This wasn't just a dress, it was a statement, a declaration of her worth and talent that no one could deny. "It's beautiful," Marco said softly from the doorway. "Are you sure about this?" Sophia nodded, her eyes never leaving the gown. I've never been more sure of anything in my life. As they prepared for bed, both too wired to sleep, Marco caught Sophia's hand. Whatever happens tomorrow, he said earnestly, I want you to know how proud I am of you. You're the strongest person I know, Sophia. Tears pricked at Sophia's eyes, but for the first time in weeks, they weren't tears of sorrow. She squeezed Marco's hand, feeling a warmth bloom in her chest that had nothing to do with the case. Thank you, she whispered, for believing in me when I couldn't believe in myself. As they stood there, hands clasped and hearts full of nervous anticipation, neither Sophia nor Marco could have imagined the storm that was about to break over the fashion world, a storm with Sophia at its very center. The morning of the hearing dawned bright and clear, as if the heavens themselves were shining a spotlight on the drama about to unfold. Sophia stood before the mirror in Marco's apartment, barely recognizing the woman who stared back at her. Gone was the timid seamstress, replaced by a vision of elegance and determination. The gown she had poured her heart and soul into fit her like a second skin, its intricate beadwork catching the light with every movement. Her long dark hair was swept up into an elaborate updo, adorned with a single white lily, a symbol of rebirth and purity. Are you ready? Marco asked, appearing in the doorway. He looked dashing in his best suit, but his eyes were fixed on Sophia with a mix of awe and concern. Sophia took a deep breath, smoothing her hands over the silk of her gown. As ready as I'll ever be. The ride to the courthouse was tense with anticipation. As they pulled up to the imposing building, Sophia's heart began to race. A small crowd had already gathered, journalists, fashion bloggers, and curious onlookers drawn by the promise of scandal. Remember, Marco said as he helped her from the car, no matter what happens in there, you've already won by not letting them break your spirit. Sophia nodded, squaring her shoulders. As they climbed the courthouse steps, a hush fell over the crowd. All eyes were on Sophia, murmurs of admiration rippling through the assembled spectators. Inside, the courtroom was packed. Sophia's eyes immediately found Victoria Belmont, sitting at the defendant's table with a team of high-powered lawyers. Victoria's face, usually a mask of cool disdain, showed a flicker of surprise as she took in Sophia's transformed appearance. As Sophia made her way to her seat, she could hear the whispers. Is that really the seamstress? That gown, it's exquisite. Did she make that herself? The judge called the court to order, and the proceedings began. Marco presented their case with passion and skill, outlining the discrimination and unfair treatment Sophia had endured. Victoria's lawyers fought back hard, painting Sophia as an ungrateful employee who had delusions of grandeur. Throughout it all, Sophia sat tall, her gown a silent testament to her talent and worth. She could feel Victoria's icy glare, but for once, it didn't make her shrink. Instead, she met it with a calm determination. As the morning wore on, an unexpected twist occurred. One of Victoria's former assistants, a young woman named Emily, stepped forward to testify. With trembling hands but a steady voice, she corroborated Sophia's claims of mistreatment and revealed Victoria's long history of discriminatory practices. Ms. Belmont has a pattern of targeting employees from diverse backgrounds, Emily stated, her voice gaining strength. She would often make derogatory comments about their accents, their appearance, or their socioeconomic status. Sophia wasn't the first to suffer, but she was the most talented, and I think that threatened Ms. Belmont even more. A ripple of shock went through the courtroom. Victoria's face turned an alarming shade of red as she furiously whispered to her lawyers. Sophia felt a surge of gratitude towards Emily, knowing how much courage it must have taken to speak out against such a powerful figure. As Emily's testimony concluded, the judge called for a brief recess. The courtroom buzzed with excitement and speculation. Journalists frantically tapped away on their phones, no doubt breaking the news of this unexpected turn of events. In the hallway outside, Sophia found herself surrounded by a small crowd of fashion bloggers and industry insiders, all clamoring to get a closer look at her gown. "This is absolutely stunning," one woman gushed, running her fingers along the intricate beadwork. "You designed this yourself?" Sophia nodded, a mix of pride and nervousness coursing through her. "Yes, I did. It's a representation of everything I've been through, and everything I hope to achieve." "Well, darling," drawled a tall man with a shock of silver hair, "if this is any indication of your talent, Victoria Belmont is a fool for letting you go." As the crowd continued to admire her work, Sophia caught sight of Marco speaking intently with one of Victoria's lawyers. Her heart skipped a beat. What new development could this bring? Before she could make her way over to him, a hush fell over the hallway. Victoria Belmont herself had emerged from a side room, her face a mask of barely controlled fury. As she strode past Sophia, she paused for just a moment, her ice-blue eyes raking over the gown with a mixture of envy and disdain. "Enjoy your moment in the spotlight, little seamstress," Victoria hissed, her voice low enough that only Sophia could hear. "It won't last." With that, she swept back into the courtroom, leaving Sophia shaken but more determined than ever. As the proceedings resumed, Marco approached the judge with an unexpected request. "Your Honor," he said, his voice steady and clear, "in light of the new testimony and evidence that has come to light, we would like to propose a settlement conference." The judge raised an eyebrow, looking between Marco and Victoria's legal team. "Counselor, are you amenable to this suggestion?" Victoria's lead lawyer leaned in to confer with his client, their heated whispers just audible from where Sophia sat. After a tense moment, he straightened up. "We are willing to discuss a settlement, Your Honor." The judge nodded. "Very well. We'll recess for 1 hour to allow both parties to confer. I expect you all back here with either a settlement or prepared to continue with the hearing." As the courtroom emptied, Sophia felt a mixture of relief and apprehension. Was this a good sign? Or was Victoria planning some new scheme to discredit her? Marco led her to a small conference room, his face unreadable. "Sophia," he said once they were alone, "I think we have a real chance here. Victoria's lawyers are rattled by Emily's testimony, and the public attention your gown is getting, well, it's making them nervous." Sophia took a deep breath, smoothing her hands over the silk of her creation. "What do you think they'll offer?" "Hard to say," Marco admitted. "But whatever it is, remember, you hold more cards than you realize. That gown, it's not just a piece of clothing. It's proof of everything they tried to deny about you." As they waited for Victoria's team to join them, Sophia's mind raced with possibilities. Could this really be the turning point she dreamed of? Or was it just another cruel trick of fate? The door opened, and Victoria swept in, flanked by her lawyers. Her eyes were cold as she took her seat across from Sophia, but there was something else there too, a flicker of uncertainty that Sophia had never seen before. "Let's get this over with," Victoria snapped. "What do you want?" Marco leaned forward, his voice calm but firm. Full reinstatement of Sophia's position, with back pay for the time she was unfairly dismissed. A public apology for the discriminatory treatment she endured. And he paused, glancing at Sophia for confirmation, creative control over her own line within Belmont and Finch. Victoria's laugh was sharp and brittle. "You must be joking. I'd sooner burn my company to the ground than give her that kind of power." "Miss Belmont," Marco replied, his tone level, "I don't think you fully grasped the situation you're in. The testimony we heard today is just the tip of the iceberg. We have more witnesses ready to come forward, more evidence of systemic discrimination within your company. Not to mention the public relations nightmare you're facing." He gestured to Sophia's gown. "This creation has already captured the attention of the fashion world. People are asking why someone with this level of talent was relegated to a basement workroom. The story of the humble seamstress rising from obscurity, well, it's the kind of narrative the media loves. Victoria's face paled slightly, her eyes darting between Marco and Sophia. For the first time, Sophia saw a crack in the woman's icy facade. I need to confer with my team, Victoria said finally, her voice lacking its usual bite. As Victoria and her lawyers huddled in the corner of the room, Sophia felt a surge of hope. Could it be possible that she was actually going to win? The minutes ticked by, the tension in the room growing with each passing moment. Finally, Victoria returned to the table, her face a careful mask of neutrality. "We're prepared to offer a settlement," she said, her voice clipped. "Reinstatement with back pay, as requested. A public statement acknowledging Ms. Martinez's contributions to the company. And..." She paused, as if the words pained her, "creative input on select projects moving forward." Marco raised an eyebrow. "Creative input isn't the same as creative control, Ms. Belmont." Victoria's eyes flashed. "It's more than generous, given the circumstances." Sophia felt Marco tense beside her, ready to argue further. But something inside her shifted. She placed a hand on Marco's arm, silencing him with a look. "I have a counter-proposal," Sophia said, her voice soft but steady. All eyes turned to her, surprise evident on every face. This was the moment, Sophia realized, that would define not just her career, but her very sense of self. "I don't want to come back to Belmont and Finch," she said, the words feeling right as soon as they left her mouth. "What I want, what I need, is the opportunity to stand on my own." Victoria's eyebrows shot up. "And how exactly do you propose to do that, Ms. Martinez? You have no money, no connections, no..." "I have my talent," Sophia interrupted, her voice growing stronger. "And thanks to you, Ms. Belmont, I now have something else, a story. A story that people seem very interested in hearing." She stood, the beads on her gown catching the light and sending shimmering reflections across the room. "Here's my offer, you will provide seed money for me to start my own label. A small percentage of ownership, nothing that would give you control. In return, I won't pursue this lawsuit any further, and I'll publicly thank you for recognizing my potential and supporting diverse voices in fashion." The room fell silent, all eyes on Victoria. The fashion mogul's face was unreadable, her eyes never leaving Sophia's. "And if I refuse?" Victoria asked finally, her voice low. Sophia took a deep breath. "Then we go back into that courtroom. We bring forward every witness, every piece of evidence. We let the world see exactly who Victoria Belmont really is. Win or lose, your reputation will never recover." For a long moment, no one spoke. The tension in the room was palpable, like a rubber band stretched to its breaking point. Then, slowly, impossibly, Victoria Belmont began to laugh. It started as a low chuckle and grew until she was almost doubled over, tears streaming down her face. "Oh, my dear," she gasped finally, wiping her eyes, "I underestimated you. All this time, I thought you were just another faceless worker bee. But you have fire." She stood, extending her hand across the table. "You have a deal, Ms. Martinez. I look forward to seeing what you create and to crushing you in the marketplace." Sophia took Victoria's hand, her grip firm. "Thank you, Ms. Belmont. I look forward to the challenge." As they exited the conference room, the hallway erupted into a frenzy of flashing cameras and shouted questions. Sophia felt Marco's steadying presence beside her as they made their way through the crowd. "Ms. Martinez, is it true you've reached a settlement?" "Victoria, any comment on the discrimination allegations?" Sophia, Who designed that incredible gown? Sophia paused, turning to face the sea of reporters. This was it, her moment to step into the spotlight on her own terms. Yes, we've reached an agreement, she said, her voice clear and confident. Ms. Belmont has generously agreed to support my new venture, an independent fashion label that will celebrate diversity and creativity in all its forms. She smoothed her hands over her gown, a smile playing at her lips. As for this dress, it's the first creation of Sophia Martinez Designs. And I promise you, it's just the beginning. The crowd erupted into a frenzy of questions and exclamations, but Sophia barely heard them. Her mind was already racing with possibilities, designs, and dreams she'd kept locked away for far too long. As they pushed through the courthouse doors into the bright afternoon sunlight, Marco squeezed her hand. "You did it, Sophia," he said, his voice filled with pride and something else, something warmer that made Sophia's heart skip a beat. "We did it," she corrected him, returning the squeeze. "I couldn't have done any of this without you, Marco." For a moment, they stood there, hands clasped and eyes locked, the chaos of the media circus fading into the background. Then, with a shared laugh of pure joy and relief, they made their way down the courthouse steps and into Sophia's bright new future. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of activity. News of Sophia's victory over Victoria Belmont spread like wildfire through the fashion industry and beyond. Overnight, she became a symbol of perseverance and triumph over adversity, her story resonating with people from all walks of life. Sophia's phone rang constantly with interview requests, offers of collaboration, and messages of support from around the world. It was overwhelming, exhilarating, and more than a little terrifying. Through it all, Marco remained her rock, helping her navigate the sudden influx of attention and guiding her through the complex process of setting up her new business. They spent long nights poring over contracts, brainstorming ideas for her first collection, and discussing the values that would define Sophia Martinez Designs. "I want to create more than just beautiful clothes," Sophia explained one evening, her eyes bright with passion. "I want to build a brand that celebrates diversity, that gives opportunities to talented people who might otherwise be overlooked." Marco nodded, a warm smile playing at his lips. "Just like someone gave you a chance?" Sophia felt a rush of gratitude wash over her. "Exactly. I wouldn't be here if you hadn't believed in me, Marco. I want to pay that forward." As the launch date for her first collection approached, Sophia threw herself into her work with a fervor that surprised even her. The tiny apartment she'd rented to serve as both living space and studio was soon overflowing with sketches, fabric swatches, and half-finished garments. She assembled a small team of talented misfits, a pattern maker who'd been told she was too old for the industry, a recent design school graduate whose unconventional ideas had been dismissed by the big fashion houses, and a marketing whiz who'd left her high-powered job after facing discrimination. Together, they worked tirelessly to bring Sophia's vision to life. Each piece in the collection told a story of resilience, of beauty found in unexpected places, of the power of staying true to oneself. The night before the launch, Sophia stood in her studio, surrounded by the fruits of their labor. Gowns in rich, vibrant colors hung from every available surface, each one a testament to the journey that had brought her to this moment. A soft knock at the door pulled her from her reverie. It was Marco, looking dashing in a suit she'd insisted on making for him. "How are you feeling?" he asked, his eyes taking in the explosion of creativity around them. Sophia took a deep breath, smoothing her hands over the dress she wore, a more refined version of the gown that had caused such a stir at the courthouse. "Nervous. Excited. Terrified. Is it possible to feel all those things at once?" Marco laughed, stepping closer. "I think that's the definition of following your dreams." For a moment, they stood in comfortable silence, the air between them charged with unspoken emotions. Then, hesitantly, Marco reached out and took her hand. "Sophia," he said softly, "there's something I've been wanting to tell you." Something I should have said a long time ago. Sophia's heart began to race, hope and fear warring in her chest. What is it? Marco opened his mouth to speak, but before he could get the words out, they were interrupted by the shrill ring of Sophia's phone. With an apologetic smile, she answered it, her eyes never leaving Marco's face. Hello? Yes, this is Sophia Martinez. As she listened, her eyes widened in disbelief. Are you sure? But how? I mean, yes. Yes, of course. Thank you. Thank you so much. She hung up, her hands shaking slightly. Marco, she breathed, that was Anna Wintour's office. They want to feature my collection in the next issue of Vogue. A full spread, with an interview. Marco's face lit up with joy. Sophia, that's incredible. I knew you could do it. He pulled her into a tight embrace, both of them laughing and crying at the same time. As they pulled apart, their eyes met, and for a moment, the world seemed to stand still. Slowly, inevitably, they leaned towards each other. Their lips met in a kiss that was soft and sweet and full of promise, a perfect moment of triumph and new beginnings. But even as Sophia's heart soared, a shadow loomed on the horizon. For in her moment of greatest victory, forces were aligning against her, forces that would test her resilience, her talent, and her very sense of self in ways she could never have imagined. Victoria Belmont sat in her opulent office, her manicured nails tapping an irritated rhythm on her desk as she glared at the magazine spread before her. Sophia Martinez's radiant face smiled up at her from the glossy pages of Vogue, surrounded by images of her stunning debut collection. This wasn't supposed to happen, Victoria snarled, her voice dripping with venom. She was supposed to crash and burn, not become the darling of the fashion world. Her assistant, a nervous young man named Timothy, shifted uncomfortably. Ms. Belmont, perhaps we should consider a different approach. Ms. Martinez's success could be seen as a reflection of your own eye for talent. Silence! Victoria snapped, rising from her chair with a fury that made Timothy flinch. I will not be overshadowed by some upstart from the slums. Find me dirt on her, Timothy. I don't care what it takes. Everyone has skeletons in their closet, and I want Sophia Martinez's laid bare for the world to see. As Timothy scurried from the room, Victoria turned to gaze out over the New York skyline. Her reflection in the glass stared back at her, cold and determined. Enjoy your moment in the sun, little Sophia, she murmured. It won't last long. Across town, blissfully unaware of the storm brewing on the horizon, Sophia Martinez was living her dream. The success of her debut collection had catapulted her into the upper echelons of the fashion world, and she was determined to make the most of every opportunity. The Sophia Martinez Design Studio was a hive of activity, filled with the hum of sewing machines and the excited chatter of her growing team. Sophia moved through the space with purpose, her eyes sparkling with creativity as she reviewed sketches, approved fabric choices, and offered gentle guidance to her staff. Remember, she said to a young designer who was struggling with a particularly challenging piece, every garment tells a story. What story does this one want to tell? As she worked, Sophia couldn't help but reflect on how far she'd come. From the basement of Belmont and Finch to her own thriving label, it was more than she'd ever dared to dream. And yet, there was still so much she wanted to accomplish. Her phone buzzed with a message from Marco. Dinner tonight? I have news. Sophia felt a flutter in her stomach that had nothing to do with fashion. Since their kiss on the night before her launch, things between them had been complicated. Wonderful, but complicated. They'd been so busy with their respective careers that they barely had time to explore what that moment had meant. Can't wait, she texted back, a smile playing at her lips. As the day wore on, Sophia found herself increasingly distracted by thoughts of Marco and their dinner plans. What news could he have? And more importantly, would they finally have a chance to talk about where their relationship was heading? She was so lost in thought that she almost didn't notice when Emily, her former colleague from Belmont and Finch who now worked as her assistant, approached with a worried expression. "Sophia," Emily said hesitantly, "there's something you need to see." She handed Sophia a tablet, open to a gossip website. Sophia's heart sank as she read the headline, "Fashion Cinderella Story, The Dark Truth Behind Sophia Martinez's Rise to Fame." The article was a vicious hit piece, filled with half-truths and outright lies. It accused Sophia of everything from stealing designs to manipulating the media with a fabricated rags-to-riches story. But what made Sophia's blood run cold was a quote from an anonymous source close to the designer. "Sophia Martinez is not the innocent victim she pretends to be," the source claimed. "She's a calculating opportunist who seduced her way to the top." Her relationship with her lawyer, Marco Rodriguez, began long before the lawsuit against Belmont and Finch. The whole thing was a setup from the start. Sophia felt the room spin around her. How could anyone say such horrible things? And who would want to hurt her like this? As if in answer to her unspoken question, her phone rang. The caller ID displayed a name that made her stomach churn, Victoria Belmont. With trembling fingers, Sophia answered the call. "What do you want, Victoria?" Victoria's voice was silky smooth, dripping with false concern. "Oh, Sophia, darling. I just wanted to check on you. I saw that dreadful article, simply awful. You must be devastated." Sophia gritted her teeth, anger replacing her initial shock. "Cut the act, Victoria. We both know you're behind this." Victoria's laugh was cold and brittle. "Prove it, little seamstress." "Oh wait, you can't. Just like you can't prove that your success is anything more than a fleeting moment of public fascination with your sob story. Why are you doing this?" Sophia demanded, her voice shaking with emotion. "I've done nothing to you." "Nothing?" Victoria hissed, her tone suddenly venomous. "You humiliated me. You made me look weak. And now, you're going to learn what happens to people who cross Victoria Belmont." The line went dead, leaving Sophia staring at her phone in disbelief. Around her, the studio had gone quiet, all eyes on their leader, waiting to see how she would react. Sophia took a deep breath, squaring her shoulders. She wouldn't let Victoria see her sweat. She wouldn't let her team down. And most of all, she wouldn't let this destroy everything she'd worked so hard to build. "Emily," she said, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside her, "call our PR team. We need to get ahead of this story." As Emily hurried to make the call, Sophia's phone buzzed with another message from Marco, "Saw the article. On my way." Sophia felt a wave of relief wash over her. Whatever happened, she wouldn't have to face it alone. The next few hours were a blur of activity. Sophia and her team worked tirelessly to craft a response to the allegations, reaching out to friendly journalists and influencers who could help counter the narrative Victoria was trying to spin. Marco arrived, his face etched with concern and anger. "I can't believe she would stoop this low," he fumed, pacing the length of Sophia's office. "We should sue her for defamation." Sophia shook her head, a plan already forming in her mind. No, that's exactly what she wants, to drag this out in the courts, to keep the story in the news. We need to do something she won't expect. As night fell over New York City, Sophia stood before her team, her eyes blazing with determination. "I know you're all worried," she said, her voice strong and clear. "But we're not going to let this break us. In fact, we're going to use it to make us stronger." She outlined her plan, watching as looks of confusion gave way to understanding and then excitement. By the time she finished speaking, the studio was buzzing with energy, everyone eager to play their part. "It's risky," Marco warned her later as they shared a quiet moment alone. "Are you sure about this?" Sophia nodded, reaching out to take his hand. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life. But Marco, before we do this, I need to know that quote about us, about our relationship." Marco's eyes widened in understanding. "Sophia, no. You can't possibly think." "I don't," she assured him quickly. "But I need to hear it from you." Marco pulled her close, his eyes never leaving hers. "Sophia Martinez, I have been in love with you since the day you walked into my office with fire in your eyes and determination in your heart. Everything that's happened between us has been real. And if you'll have me, I want to face whatever comes next together." Tears pricked at Sophia's eyes as she leaned in to kiss him. For a moment, the world fell away, and it was just the two of them, standing on the precipice of something wonderful and terrifying. When they finally parted, Sophia's smile was radiant. "Together," she agreed. "Now, let's go show Victoria Belmont what we're made of." The next week passed in a frenzy of activity. While Victoria's smear campaign continued to make waves in the media, Sophia and her team worked around the clock, pushing themselves to the limit of their creativity and endurance. Finally, the day arrived. New York Fashion Week was in full swing, and the fashion world was abuzz with anticipation for Sophia Martinez's sophomore collection. But as the lights dimmed in the venue, a ripple of confusion passed through the audience. Instead of the traditional runway, the space had been transformed into a series of vignettes, each one telling a story. And as the first model stepped out, a gasp of surprise and delight echoed through the room. The collection was unlike anything anyone had ever seen. Each piece was a work of art, incorporating elements of Sophia's journey, from the humble fabrics of her childhood to the luxurious materials of high fashion. But it was the way they were presented that truly set them apart. The models, rather than simply walking the runway, engaged in a series of carefully choreographed scenes. A young woman in a stunning gown made from repurposed denim sat at a sewing machine, her fingers flying over the fabric. An elegant suit, its jacket lined with newspaper clippings about Sophia's rise to fame, was worn by a model who strode confidently past a group of sneering photographers. As the show progressed, the story became clear. This wasn't just a fashion collection, it was Sophia's autobiography, told through cloth and thread. Every piece represented a moment in her journey, from her humble beginnings to her triumphs and setbacks. The final look left the audience breathless. It was a wedding gown, but unlike any they had ever seen. The bodice was a patchwork of fabrics, each one representing a different chapter in Sophia's life. The skirt billowed out in a cascade of white silk, but as the model turned, gasps of awe filled the room. Embroidered on the train, in tiny, exquisite stitches, were the words from the hateful article Victoria had planted. But they were surrounded by messages of love and support from Sophia's team, her family, and her fans. The negativity was there, acknowledged but ultimately overwhelmed by the positivity that surrounded it. As Sophia stepped out for her bow, the audience rose to their feet in a thunderous standing ovation. Tears streamed down her face as she took in the response, her heart swelling with pride and gratitude. In the front row, Victoria Belmont sat rigid with shock, her face pale and her eyes wide. She had come expecting to witness Sophia's downfall, but instead, she had seen her rival rise like a phoenix from the ashes of her attempted destruction. As the applause continued to wash over her, Sophia caught sight of Marco in the wings, his face beaming with pride and love. She beckoned him to join her, and as they stood hand in hand before the cheering crowd, Sophia knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, she had the strength to face them. In the days that followed, the fashion world could talk of little else. Sophia's collection was hailed as a masterpiece, a bold statement on resilience and the power of turning pain into art. Orders flooded in from boutiques and department stores around the world, and celebrities clamored to wear her designs on red carpets. But for Sophia, the true victory came in quieter moments. It was in the letters and emails she received from young designers and seamstresses, telling her how her story had inspired them to pursue their dreams. It was in the faces of her team, glowing with pride at what they had accomplished together. And it was in the quiet evenings spent with Marco, planning their future and dreaming of the beautiful things they would create, both in fashion and in life. As for Victoria Belmont, the backlash was swift and merciless. Her attempts to discredit Sophia had backfired spectacularly, exposing her own ruthless tactics and tarnishing her carefully cultivated image. Within months, she found herself ousted from her own company, her empire crumbling around her. One rainy afternoon, as Sophia was leaving her studio, she spotted a familiar figure huddled in a doorway across the street. It was Victoria, looking pale and drawn, her designer clothes replaced by a shabby coat. For a moment, Sophia hesitated. Then, with a sigh, she crossed the street, holding her umbrella out to shelter her former tormentor. Victoria looked up, her eyes widening in recognition and then narrowing with suspicion. "Come to gloat?" she spat. Sophia shook her head. "No, Victoria. I came to offer you a job." Victoria's jaw dropped. "You, what?" "You're a brilliant designer, Victoria," Sophia said softly. "You just lost your way. I'm offering you a chance to remember why you fell in love with fashion in the first place." For a long moment, Victoria said nothing, her face a battleground of pride and desperation. Finally, she nodded, a single tear mixing with the rain on her cheek. As they walked back to the studio together, Sophia felt a sense of peace settle over her. She had faced her demons, both external and internal, and had emerged stronger for it. She had built something beautiful out of adversity, and in doing so, had changed not just her own life, but the lives of those around her. The humble seamstress had become a fashion icon, not just because of her talent, but because of her heart. And as she looked to the future, hand in hand with Marco and surrounded by a team that had become a family, Sophia knew that the best was yet to come. In the years that followed, Sophia Martinez Designs became a global phenomenon, known not just for its stunning creations but for its commitment to ethical practices and nurturing new talent. Sophia and Marco married in a ceremony that was as much a celebration of love as it was a fashion event, with Sophia wearing a gown that she had designed with input from her entire team. Victoria, true to her word, found her passion for design reignited under Sophia's mentorship. While their relationship remained complicated, there was a grudging respect between them that slowly, over time, blossomed into an unlikely friendship. And on quiet evenings, when the hustle and bustle of the fashion world faded away, Sophia would sit at her old sewing machine, Marco by her side, creating not for the runways or the red carpets, but for the pure joy of bringing beauty into the world. For in the end, that was what it had always been about, not fame or fortune, but the simple, profound act of creation. With every stitch, Sophia wrote her story anew, a testament to the power of perseverance, kindness, and the unbreakable spirit of a humble seamstress who dared to dream.